My name is Tom Howe. I grew up in Hong Kong, but I was not born here. We've moved to Hoi Ha, I think it's 7 years now. I've lived in the new territories maybe for 10. Prior to that, I lived in another village in Sai Kung. It's basically just my wife and myself and the animals, and we love it here. The first time I came, I think there were maybe 4 houses less than what we have now. In other words, during those 7 years, 4 houses were built. But still, by any stretch of imagination, it's a very small village. And it's quiet, and you know all your neighbors, which is quite different from my other life in Hong Kong. I've moved back to Hong Kong since 1988. And we lived in Discovery Bay for a while, and then in mid-levels for a while, and then we moved out to Sai Kung. And here, it's really the environment. I mean, the bay out here, Hoi Ha Wan, it's within the marine park. It's protected. In other words, you can't fish, you can't take anything out from here, although some people do. But we go swimming in the morning. You may not believe it, but I have some fish friends here, whom I see now and then. And so it's basically the environment that attracted me. Within the country park, there are many little villages, and there are private land which is owned by the indigenous population. But they are smack in the middle of the country park. There's no roads to it. There's no means of transport. It's just very inconvenient. And as a result, quite a few of these so-called enclaves, the villagers have simply abandoned it because it's just too hard to live there. And within this cluster of enclaves, there are a few. Hoi Ha is one of them. But Hoi Ha is different because there's a road leading to here, which has a spectacular view, and it's also close to the beach. And so about more than 3 years ago, we started to see the government saying things like, maybe because of the housing shortage in Hong Kong, we should look into finding some land in the country park and allow some building in the country park. And then we started to see another pattern, that is, it's not just any land that they want. They wanted, or they still want, to build in the most scenic enclaves. Hoi Ha is one of them, and you have Solo Poon, and you have Pak Lap, and you have Pak Tau Mau. All these are the areas which they really wanted. And then, but the excuse they used was that because there's a shortage of housing in Hong Kong, therefore we should find land, and therefore maybe we can build in the country park. That's the logic they try to tell the public. But if you look at the enclaves or building in a country park, first of all houses has to be 3 stories. You cannot go higher. And also, most of these enclaves are very isolated. It will take people maybe 2.5 hours to go to Central. And so, I mean, who in their right frame of mind would want to live here? And so, in that sense, it's not really an ideal solution to solving the housing shortage problem. And then when we started to look into these developers, we found that they are the history is all to do with luxury villa building. And so, in fact, what they wanted was not really to find land for building high-rises to solve housing shortage. What they want is to have land to build villas so they can profit from that. And this is the thing that I found that I'm most angry with. And it's also one of the reasons why we spend quite a bit of time fighting the government on the country park problem that we have now. Most of us are so-called, maybe not in the absolute term environmentalists, but we are mostly environment friendly. A lot of us have spent time outside of Hong Kong and have seen what country parks can be like in Yosemite, for example. I mean, it's protected. Here it's not. So I would say most of us are environmentally friendly, have lived abroad, probably more educated, and share a common interest, and that is to protect the parks in Hong Kong. From the cultural point of view, one of the reasons why a lot of the country park supporters are fighting so hard is because Sai Kung is really one area left in Hong Kong where you still get some rural, rustic feel when you come inside here. And if we change that, we are not going to have another comparable place for the next generation, because this will be gone. And in my letter to the CE, I cited an example. And I said, when I was a child in high school, every fall, the school used to have one activity, and that is, how do you say it in English? One day's outing to the new territories. At that time, Sha Tin, for example, it's a satellite city now, about 40 minutes from here. That's complete farmland. And we used to have to scale the Lion Rock mountain and then come down a valley before we could get to Sha Tin. It's a whole day's trip. But today, Sha Tin has developed into a 300,000 population satellite city. The problem with that the government is trying to con us into is, why don't we just allow some small-scale development in the country park? The problem is if you allow one, there will be someone, the second one will want to build. And you cannot turn him down if you have allowed the first one to build. And if we look at Sha Tin today, and if we project 50, 60 years from now, the country park will be gone. Because I think there will be more massive development, highway development projects on the works that will feed into the country park, and more buildings will be built here. So from that point of view, building another 60, 70 houses here will change the culture completely here. Most of these villas will be sold in the high-end market. And so the people coming in will be wealthy people. Right now, in remote areas like this, you can still get cheaper housing. And there are families who cannot afford $100,000 a month to pay rent. And so, for example, here you can still rent a house for maybe $20,000, $30,000. And you can't do that in the city anymore, for sure. Where are these people going to go? Nowhere, because this is the end of the road. There's no more road. So the culture will change for sure. And we're feeling it in the surrounding nearby villages where luxury villas have gone up. And as far as the marine park is concerned, one characteristic of village houses is that all over the New Territories, because of the remoteness, there's really no sewage treatment system, or there's no centralized sewage treatment system. So all this house, for example, we use a septic tank. And the septic tank, eventually what it does is it just allows whatever that goes in to seep into the soil. And if you have humans, you have chemicals, detergent, and all those things are very detrimental to marine life. And right outside here, if you have a boat, if you go out there and turn right, about 2-3 miles down, you'll find the prettiest coral in Hong Kong in that area. And with the problem with that is the E. coli bacteria. If you allow human feces, chemicals, detergents to flow into the bay, and they will go into the bay because there's nowhere else to go. We are afraid, and a lot of the green groups are concerned about this as well, that it will destroy or harm the marine life in the marine park. About 30 years ago, the corals out here were, for some reason, I can't remember what now, were quite badly damaged. And it took the government 30 years to nurse it back to health. It's quite healthy now if you go. And what I can't understand is why the government would just want to, for the benefit of just 60 houses, which is not very much, risk the danger of causing, more damage to the marine park. That's what I can't understand. And I mean, you think more about it, and your natural conclusion is someone in the government is very corrupt. But these are things that I can't prove. But it doesn't mean it doesn't exist. The thing is, the government has given no consideration whatsoever to the infrastructure when they put out their plan to develop. I don't know when you came in the village, if you have seen how the parking is. The parking now is, during the weekdays, it's barely acceptable, because it's mostly the villagers who live here, and we know each other, and we try to, make way, and if I know you don't have a place to park, I'll move over a bit so you can park, and we can make do. But in the weekends, it's a problem, because outsiders come here, and then it becomes quite often your car is blocked and you can't get out. And there's been no consideration given whatsoever to the 60 houses which they proposed. I mean, if we have such a problem now with 30, can you imagine what it would be like if you add 60 more to it? I don't know what's going to happen in the future, because right now it's okay because it's so small. But once it becomes big, and if you have a different type of people moving in, then it becomes far more difficult. Because we have a small house policy, which is a law, indigenous people, they should be allowed to continue with their tradition, which is to build a house for a male descendant. I think that should be allowed. But the problem is now the small house policy is abused. The male indigenous villagers, he sells his right to the developers, and then the developers gathers up maybe, I don't know, 60 rights, thing rights, and then he builds 60 houses, which is completely against the intent, the small house policy. That's not what it's supposed to be, but it is what it is now. In the long term, I think the small house policy must be abolished, or should be abolished, because if you compare an indigenous and a non-indigenous person, the indigenous person has the right to build this house. Right now, just let's take some numbers. An indigenous could build a house like this for maybe 1.5 million Hong Kong, and then he can sell it in the market maybe for 10 million. Now, for a non-indigenous person, he doesn't have that right. Now, you can argue that because he could sell it for 10 million, he's got a mate for life. He doesn't have to do anything else. Whereas for a non-indigenous, he struggles all his life just to pay down his mortgage. And that, to me, is a grossly unfair thing in our society. And I think because of that, it has to go. But realistically, because it's enshrined in the law right now, Hong Kong, I don't know how much you know about it, but there was, when it was handed back to China in 1997, there was a commitment of saying that there will be no major changes in 50 years. So I think a lot of people are thinking that, okay, we'll keep the small house policy for 50 years, but after that it has to go. But before then, I think the general consensus that somehow we still have to respect the law, the unfair law which gave this advantage to the indigenous population. It certainly breaches the right to females, because only males have this right. Indigenous females do not have this right. That's number one. And it's just created a huge division within the society. Indigenous villages would look at us, non-indigenous villagers, as someone who's trying to destroy their way of life. And we don't see it that way. There is a division in this society. The indigenous, the haves, and the non-indigenous, the have-nots. I mean, the final resort is to go for a judicial review, which is you take this case to the High Court and let the judge decide what is best, whether to develop or not to develop. And we're banking on that. But so far, that step has not yet been taken because the government has not come up with a final position yet. So if I use Tailong Saiwan as an example where the judge ruled heavily in favor of the environmentalists, then I hope that Hoi Ha would be protected in that sense. But who knows? So in answer to your question, in 10 years' time, I hope it will still be more or less the same as it is today.